On behalf of SDPI, I would like to welcome you all here at this panel discussion around accessing climate finance for a resilient Pakistan. Just to give you a background, SDPI is doing a series of 4 papers to look at Pakistan's different climate and DRR related issues. And of course, climate finance is an important one. We have done a paper on climate finance for a resilient Pakistan. Another papers is on DRR implementation in Pakistan. And the third one is institutional capacity on climate resilient Pakistan. And the fourth one is on, of course, loss and damage, which has been a larger debate in the last COP, and hopefully, things would be up now in the forthcoming COP as well. Well, it is beyond doubt that Pakistan is facing a lot of issues because of the climate change and the need for adaptation, mitigation, and all the phenomena attached to it, right? From technical side to of your paper of overview paper, and also leave some of the points at the end for discussion of the experts, so that you can learn more and your paper can be informed more from the colleagues knowledge. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Hello. So thank you very much, Dr. Saab. So I will be briefly discussing about the position paper that we developed for this specific exercise. Of course, I will not be able to delve into greater detail about the paper as much as I would want to. So I will just sift through or kind of provide you with an overview of the basic contours of the paper, and also at the end, maybe leave some ideas or discussion points that we can discuss today and further refine our papers. So a quick look at the outline. I'll be talking about the international climate finance flows, the sources of climate finance, the financial instruments. Then I'll quickly go over the what is the Pakistan's context, how Pakistan remains vulnerable to climate change related disasters, and also the need for finance for climate action, and what is the policy and institutional landscape when we talk about climate finance, and then again agenda setting, some pointers to move the discussion forward. Starting from the UNFCCC, more specifically Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, which stipulates that the developed countries, the Western countries more specifically, to provide or engage in resource mobilization for developing countries to combat climate change related issues, especially in adaptation and mitigation. Of course, I think perhaps the most thrown around number is the USD 100 billion, which was not met by 2020. Of course, there's a lot of dismay over not being able to meet that threshold. If you look, there are a lot of estimates. For instance, if you look at one, so for developing countries to meet their NDCs by 2030, an estimated $6 trillion will be required. Moving towards a more generic view, so from 2017, 2018 to 2019 and 20, we see a 12% increase when we talk about climate change, climate finance flows. However, this might seem a staggering figure when you look at 803 billion. However, it corresponds to about 31 to 32% of the investment essential for maintaining temperature rise well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degree pathways. If we dissect the finance, climate finance, we see that the adaptation finance has continued to increase from about 20% in 17-18 to 28% in 19-20. It has grown at a higher rate when we compare it with mitigation finance. Looking at the cross-cutting finance, which includes both the mitigation and adaptation purposes, we see a stagnation at 14 to 15%, 17-18 and 19-20 respectively. I'm not going to go into much detail of this, but essentially 3 years of climate finance flows by sector. You see that the clean energy systems, the sustainable transport and building infrastructure continues to lead the way from 17 to 20 when it comes to climate finance being mobilized. Sources of fund, of course, these are just the top tiers of the differentiations or the taxonomy. When we talk about the sources of fund, within each of these remain further bifurcations of within each of these sources. Financial instruments through which this climate finance actually mobilizes. So then we come to where does Pakistan stand, or what is Pakistan's context in vis-a-vis climate finance. Of course, we have been among the most vulnerable countries when it comes to climate change related impacts. If we look at the economic aspect of those, the 2022 floods alone caused an economic loss of over 30 billion, and the reconstruction bill amounts to about USD 16 billion. Looking at the annual need for adaptation purposes, the requirement stands at about 7 to 14 USD, 7 to 14 billion USD. So in terms of what the government envisions, perhaps an ambitious vision, by 2030, we look to reduce our emissions by 50%. So when we look at it in economic terms, a 20% reduction to occur by 2030 would require approximately 40 billion worth of investment if we are to reduce 20% of GHG emissions by 2030. Pakistan's experience with the GCF and GEF, we have been able to find some success. Of course, that's a start. There are a lot of other unutilized climate investment funds that still remain out there. There are other significant bilateral climate funds or facilities. Under the NAMA, the Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Actions, we only have one project, which is for the textile sector. So looking at the policy landscape and the institutional framework with regards to climate finance, we have the Ministry of the Ministry of Climate, the Ministry of Finance, the Planning Commission, and NDMA to an extent, which engages with different aspects of these policies that have come into play, and all of these talk about the need to mobilize climate finance to meet Pakistan's climate actions. So coming to the point where I want to, come up with some of the ideas that perhaps if I can throw to our speakers or put it out there for everyone to engage and deliberate upon. There is space to engage climate investment funds. There is space to engage the bilateral and multilateral funds that are still available out there. There's immense potential and immense finance that is available. However, there is a need of alignment and coherence and synergy of existing policies. The technical and human resource capacity remains an issue. The transparency in utilization of funds is one of the major issues that we need to discuss. The public-private partnerships, the legal and institutional framework backing them needs to be strengthened. The green bonds guidelines require some further improvement. And then also where and how can we bring in community perspectives into the whole debate to strengthen it. So this is just briefly some of the research that we've done here. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Dr. Saab. Thank you.
Thank you, Khavar, for this, some of the glimpses from your paper. Of course, the detailed paper have some more details, but whatever is presented here is the situation analysis, what we need, what is at the moment we have been able to access and what we need to access, what are the challenges. So moving on from the challenges side, I would request Dr. Imran that you are also, now you have been, WWF have been successful in accessing the climate finance recently. So what is your experience and what are the challenges which actually we are facing as a country, which actually we should.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be back here at SDPI. Spent about 6 years here. So it's always good to come back home. So this is a very important issue that you've taken up. I think, we are in the news, WWF is in the news because of the Green Climate Fund and the Recharge Pakistan program that we've been hearing about for the past many years, but it's only now come to fruition. But as my colleague Fawad was saying, it took a long time. I mean, it wasn't easy. You had a number of people working at it. And this was my last point I was going to make, but let me start with that. And you have to deal with lengthy bureaucratic processes internally as well as externally. You need, when you're applying for funding by the Green Climate Fund. So Green Climate Fund, if you look at it right now, it has about $12 billion of funding, right? And when when we started to work towards the Recharge program about 6 years back, we weren't sure of the processes. WWF had something in mind in terms of how to address flood risk in those areas that were flooded in 2010 and which were even flooded last year, but there was no mechanism available as to how to go about getting it done. What we realized was that yes, GCF is an opportunity, but you need to be accredited. So in Pakistan, there are only two entities who are accredited right now. At that time, there weren't even two. So you have the NRSP, the National Rural Support Program, as well as the it's a JS Bank, right? So these are the only two entities that are accredited, and that means only if you want to bring in money for climate adaptation, for example, you have to go through these entities. So these entities can serve as the key entities that are applying for this. As part of the global WWF network, we allied with WWF US and then applied for these funds. There was a lot of back and forth. The GCF has a particular format. So if anyone wants to look at how we went about this, everything is available on the GCF website, from our proposal to the studies that we've done, feasibility studies, and the whole process is listed down there. We needed a nationally designated authority, which was the Ministry of Climate Change, right? So we had to work directly with them to ensure that everything that we were doing was in line with the national goals of the country. And that eventually led to the Recharge Pakistan program being put in as part of the NDCs, right? But that was only the beginning. And then you had to go through this process whereby we allied with WWF US, worked on the proposal. Eventually, we were supported by the project preparation facility at the GCF, got a grant for about $750,000 to do a feasibility study, to go into the communities, have a detailed overview. And then there was this whole notion of co-financing that perhaps Fawad can also speak about as to why that's necessary. At the end of the day, what happened was that we eventually got the funds amounting to about 78 million USD. 68 is in grants, not loans or anything else. That's important from the GCF. And then there are $5 million coming from the Coca-Cola Foundation and $5 million from USAID. So it's a number of stakeholders were involved. We involved the communities, involved the stakeholders in the government, and then it was a prolonged process through which we went about and got this done. WWF, because we had an ally in WWF US, we were able to get it done. They had some experience on it. But any entity who wants to get up and tries to do this will face some difficulties. And that speaks to the hurdles that are posed by climate finance at the global level. So let me very quickly just build on what Ahmed Khabar was just speaking about. So, I had the chance to look at the paper. And a couple of suggestions here would be to look at the Climate Public Expenditure Institution Review Report, the CPR report that came out in around 2016. And this report was prepared with tagging of climate-related projects in mind. So what it said was that every time there is a climate-related project and it goes through the governance process, it will be tagged as such. And then you'll be able to follow it. And so I'm not really sure to what extent it is happening. And this is something that you can pick up because this was a government-led report. The second thing is Pakistan's climate financing framework. Again, this would develop with the help of the UNDP. This came out in 2017. So a lot of the recommendations align with your recommendations. And so what I'd like to know is, what are their status? What are the key hurdles we're facing? And what successes or opportunities exist in terms of moving forward? Because it has been a few years since these came about. One thing that we really require is clarity vis-a-vis climate finance. We have the sustainable finance, which speaks to the SDGs. We have green finance. Now that's mainly catering to environmental issues. And then you have climate finance. So there are overlaps, but we need to be sure as to what climate finance really means. And then we have to, understand that if something is going to be allocated as climate finance, is it really climate finance? For example, if somebody says that let's build an airport and we're going to ensure that it's energy efficient, but we know that 2% of greenhouse gas emissions come from air transportation. Now, would that qualify as climate finance, and to what extent? What if you're moving from coal to natural gas? Yes, less polluting, greenhouse gas emissions are less, but again, there is a climate impact. So that needs to be realized. We have to differentiate between domestic financing and international financing. Vis-a-vis international financing, the UN stipulated back in the 70s that 0.7% of our gross national income needs to go towards ODA. Now, ODA is different from climate financing, but nevertheless, even 0.7% from the developed world is not coming here. And hence this whole gap between the 100 billion that was stipulated in the Copenhagen Agreement of 2009, Copenhagen Accords, and then we still haven't met them. Vis-a-vis domestic financing, yes, we need to identify, how are we going to measure that? Will government provide any resources towards that, or are we only going to look for private resources? And then what about individuals who are putting up solar panels on their homes? Is that being accounted for? Because we know that's making up a significant amount of energy gap within the country. That's making up for it. So that needs to be accounted for as well. It's important to understand that mitigation finance, caters primarily to energy transport sectors, while adaptation finance caters to water and sanitation and agriculture. So when you talk about recharge, it's mainly looking at floods, and then we're involving the Ministry of Irrigation there and trying to adapt. As per the OECD, nearly 23% of financing goes towards adaptation. Is that enough? That's another question that we need to think about globally. And why is that? It's because, as I guess Fawad was alluding to earlier in our earlier discussion before the session started, that mitigation projects are economically attractive, right? There is a tangible benefit that accrues from putting up a solar power plant. So these are more bankable. The impact of an adaptation project, you cannot monetize it as such right away, right? And that's something that we need to consider when we are talking about climate finance policies. There's something, this notion of negative climate financing as well. According to the IEA, and this was interesting, and that's why I'm quoting this here. In 2020, a research report came out that said $511 billion were invested in upstream and downstream oil and gas supplies. 76 billion went to coal supplies. 11 billion USD went to fossil fuel-based power generation. So yes, this is happening while there is climate finance happening vis-a-vis renewables to and energy efficiency to the tune of over 400 billion, according to that study. But what about this aspect? This is negative climate financing. I mean, we need to account for those initiatives that contribute to the betterment of the climate and adaptation, but also addressing these negative financing. And so, for example, where would CPEC come here? How would we want to look at China-Pakistan economic corridor, where a number of coal power plants went up it's only over the past 6 years. They're only coming online right now. So think about this. The infrastructure that is coming online right now will stay here for another 30, 40 years. And so you have a 2050 net zero target, but then what about these coal power plants? So what this does is it leads to carbon lock-in. You can't move away from that. So even as we're talking about 1.5 and 2C, Pakistan, India, China, and a number of even developed countries are now, still focusing on fossil fuels. So we need to focus on our net climate finance, and that means finance for climate minus finance for fossil fuels, as well as maladaptation, and that is something that we need to account for. I mean, yes, money going towards adaptation is good, but if you're not doing it properly, that can have a negative effect. As such, key considerations will be both positive and negative climate impacts of climate finance. And then research should look at effectiveness and role played by different actors, financial instruments, and approaches to addressing climate risk. So what works for one entity in one region may not work for another. So that's why it's important that we not just speak of national strategies and national policies. We need to speak of local level strategies vis-a-vis climate finance, climate adaptation, and even climate mitigation. So I think globally, something that's come up now and that can be debated is something called the Bridgetown Agenda, and that's been proposed by the Prime Minister of Barbados. So Bridgetown is the capital of Barbados, so that's why it's being called the Bridgetown Agenda. And they're talking about revamping the whole global finance system, where you move away from the IMFs of the world and move toward a more inclusive and equitable decision-making platform. It talks about more inclusivity, bringing in the various stakeholders, going down to the communities. And people do have some issues with that, but that they can be debated. But that's what the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, is suggesting here, is that we need to move away from the status quo. And so we need to move away from the status quo, not only abroad, but also within the country in Pakistan to address climate risk. I'll just stop here.
Imran, for your valuable input. And some of the areas you have identified are really need to be part of the debate in Pakistan and globally as well. And you rightly mentioned that, negativism is there. Negative financing comes up with the result. It's not negative financing, but result shows that it is a negative. For example, we are putting a lot of solar, emphasis on solar. But are we really thinking what will happen after 25 years? when this carbon footprint would be there, the garbage of the solar panels, where would we dump them? So this will also a new kind of a debate at that time. So moving on to the adaptation mitigation side, and I would refer here. I remember in the Bali framework, I was there at the COP. There was a big, the pillar of these two, adaptation and mitigation. The third important thing was technology transfer, tech transfer. Where is that? Now, moving from Bali COP 13 to now we are moving in COP 28. 14 years, if 15 years. Where are we on the technology side? If technology has to be, the copyright, then where would these countries would go? Countries like Pakistan. The major issue is that whatever is the green technology available, that is not in our access. It is not only money that we go for the climate finance, but on reaching the similar level, maybe in technology, climate friendly technology. But here another point is there, wherever there is a debate, everything is going green now. Green banking, green business, without understanding what is this greening is all about and what are the negative consequences of putting everything green and what is the price tag of being green. So these are really new issues which are coming up to the debate. Moving on from here, I would request Fawad, because in the paper it was mentioned that there are various sources of climate finance, national, and within national there are mediatory. NDRMF is not a bank, it is sort of a mediatory. What role mediatory can play, and what sort of framework which sort of blackness you feel in the history or mediatory like NDRMF, which can really motivate it more.
Thank you, Dr. I'll take a minute before I respond to your question. I think it's no single entity which can do it, or there's no responsibility which we can actually put on one single entity. Kawa mentioned we've gone through the NDCs, we see the targets, we see the climate finance gaps there, we've identified what we've accessed so far. My question is, when we were coming up with those magical numbers, frankly, in the NDCs, did we really assess our absorption capacity? If there is any at all in the country? We have 2 direct access entities that Dr. Imran mentioned. So we have 14 international access entities. Have we exhausted all 14? No. Have we come up with projects worth $7 billion? The answer is no. Did we even spend the money we got, which is not even $1 billion? And we are talking about the year of global stocktake, moving into the next COP. It sounds really fancy to go ahead with efforts and get an L&D fund as well, but that's going to materialize in 5 years maybe. What have we done in the past 5 years? I mean, what sort of an enabling environment or a facilitation environment is available out there, or what went wrong where we pushed WWF to stay on track for 7 consecutive years before they get the money? So today we say that, okay, the country has got money, but this should have come in 2018. That is when the Integrated Water Resource Management Project was initiated. Started in 16, it should have started in 18 for 12 years and in 2030. And now we're talking 2023, trying to operationalize the whole thing by 2024. Still, they got a couple of more steps before they can sign the FAA. Is that the support we intend giving to our partners for the climate finance we talk about? Are we thinking on how to build capacities to come up with bankable projects? I mean, these are all responsible things which we need to discuss more. Up till now, what usually we've seen is how many IFIs are there, how many points are there where we can access grants. And it is common these days for a couple of years now that we come across this information that there are 28 funds which can actually give us climate finance. my question would be, are we there where we can differentiate between climate finance and development finance? I mean, the points raised by Imran are very valid. So we're not really entering into those debates. We're not really entering into that particular thing. I mean, I would take a moment to say that, okay, we had the climate change policy in 12 and the framework for implementation in 13. 10 years down, how much percent have we actually implemented the national climate change policies framework before actually coming up with the national adaptation plan? So you see, these are questions which need critical analysis and discussions, rather than we say that we could not access GCF or we didn't really access GEF in a manner we did. I mean, from the same country, we've identified that you have a NAMA sponsored. So you submitted 7 NAMAs, you got 7 rejected. You had to come up with another NAMA just to prove a point that, okay, we can get registered in the UNFCCC registry for that matter. So that means the effort of making 7 was a quantity effort, not a quality effort. Maybe we could have come up with 2 or 3 NAMAs and got those done. So that is something where the debate has to go. And on the other side, what are we doing with the money we got? Are we implementing that in time? So there are challenges, there are ends which have to be bridged actually. So when we look at that, I think we got to exhaust our options and understand that climate finance is a continuous effort. And if you dry your pipeline as a country, that means the effort to kickstart again to access that climate finance is going to be maybe 2-fold or 3-fold for that matter. On the other hand, when we, because I don't really want to give a picture where we start doubting our own expertise and stuff, because we have been accessing the funds. I mean, 2014, Pakistan was one of the top 5 countries most prepared for GCF. Since you mentioned Bali COPs, I'll give you an example of Bali. So we had the Asia Structure Dialogue of GCF in Pakistan, and the 2 projects which were presented there were 2 which are being financed right now. So one is GLOF, the other is Climate Smart Agriculture. So that means we know how to access. We have the system in place. It's just the enabling environment which has to be strengthened. The funds which have to be tapped into. And Kavar did mention about SIFs. We haven't really been accessing SIFs actually. So I wouldn't really say successful or not successful. I mean, success would be defined once we've submitted something to the SIF. And when we look at the connection, I think we look at the executive director of GCF, the one who was previously heading SIF in DC. So that is how closely they're all going to be connected actually. So it is for us to see what can we access. And for that, I mean, I would say we got to start from missing opportunities, starting from all the way back from CDM times, where the region took grants and had their development agenda fulfilled for that matter, and Pakistan is still lacking. So what is wrong now? We were much more prepared 10 years ago, while we are not prepared today. We don't have a pipeline. I mean, we have an accredited entity sitting here. I don't see somebody from MOCC today, the National Designated Authority for GEF and GCF. But I doubt if there's any pipeline project coming in the next 2 years, even a readiness proposal submitted for anything. So, I mean, we were doing something right, which we're not really following up right now. And a lot of efforts are going around in the city, in the provinces, where we intend coming up with bankable projects. And just one last fruitful thought for the attendees and participants to discuss upon. I haven't really seen any discussion so far, and that's because the NDRF is now coming up with that. I mean, we're introducing carbon markets as a facilitator, so to say. We don't really intend going into VCM or CMs, but we've raised a question with the governments where the decision has to be that give us a policy decision whether you want to fulfill the NDCs or you want to go into the voluntary carbon markets, because that's a policy decision which the government has to take. That will identify your projects into which direction do you want to take them. So that's on one side. The other side is we haven't really talked about a mix of adaptation and mitigation, while we are always just staying behind the fact that we are less than 1% emitters. I mean, 1%, that's globally. But how do we compare our emissions to our 10 years back? And how will we be comparing our emissions to our 10 years coming up? And what about the 2030 agenda and the policy supporting that particular thing? So if you want to attract private sector, if you want to attract bankable projects, revenue generating projects, you got to have a mix of adaptation and mitigation. And just one last thing, since I work in the field of DRR and DRF, the risk reduction which the country faces for now, I mean, Kawa mentioned $30 billion, so that's divided into three main things. So one is livelihood, the other is infrastructure, and third is your systems overall. So there are three core areas where 10 billion each has been lost. Do we really want to project ourselves as a disaster vulnerable country? Because from my naive common sense, I would never invest into an unstable instrument. So if you're putting your country as an unstable, disaster vulnerable instrument, I wonder how do we want to attract the FDIs, IFIs, or any finance coming into the country? So the positioning has to be right in order to access climate finance. I'd like to stop right there and happy to have discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Fawad. I think these are very interesting points, and particularly the last point which you mentioned about the preparedness side on DRR. That's important. Nobody would invest in risk. So first we have to understand risk, mitigate risk, and prioritize it. So that's the area, and you rightly mentioned that we were prepared 10 years back, and why we are not prepared for that. That's another an area where we look at the backyard, which we are losing now. So these are the areas which we have to look into, and that's why this debate we have generated again. And this is ahead of COP. We will have some more session on that. So maybe we'll benefit from your experiences there with pre-COP things. So this is a startup of that. Thank you very much, Fahad. Now, Alishba, I know you have recently joined the UNDP in this role, but you might have some of the briefings because you are in this department. What are your, UNDP always have an edge.
Thank you. I will start with the idea of expansion of vision, as mentioned by Fawad Hayat and Dr. Imran Khalid. We need to, as an individual and as a professional and at institutional level, we need to expand our vision. For the international climate finance, we only look for GCF, but there are many more windows that we can look into it. GCF is not the only fund for the climate financing. The access to the international climate finance is time consuming, and a lot of paperwork and policies and procedures for the entities are required that want to be accredited. As these are some of the challenges identified by Fawad, I guess for those organizations which look forward to assess the climate financing for the resilient Pakistan, and at least minimum of 2 years for the accreditation and another 2 years for the project approval. They have also introduced a new window where you can get accredited for specific project on a trial basis. That will only accept 10 proposals for year 2023 till 2026. Moving further, there are multiple smaller windows like project preparation facilities, which is known as PRP, and many more, which could be utilized and which we as an institute should look forward towards. Within the GCF, we can accredit for different size of the projects, which range from micro, small, medium, and large level. And if we want to cut down the time, different public and private sector entities can apply to already accredited entities like ADB, World Bank, FAO, and UNDP, etc. With respect to your question regarding UNDP, UNDP Flood Recovery Program is working for the implementation of 4RF strategy and the PDMA reports and focusing on the aftermath of the flood 2022. So they are basically implementing all the government policies developed in association with many national and international organizations And assessing to climate financing, they are working on documentation, technical and strategic both level. If we talk about the policies, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which have been upgraded with the support of NDMA and STPI. This has incorporated many figures and effects of the flood 2022. Then another document which we may discuss is National Flood Protection Plan, NFPP4. With the assistance of ADB, it has also been upgraded, which aims to implement an integrated flood management plan to minimize flood risk and maximize water resource utilizations. 4RF is another document which has been created as an aftermath of flood 2022, which focuses on resilient recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. One of the living examples of implementation of 4RF is Sindh People's Housing for Flood Affectees, which is working in the Sindh, initially funded by World Bank and now multi-donor fund. Then if we talk about the challenges which have been mentioned by Fawad and Dr. Imran Khalid, we have loans, contracted loans. We can look forward towards the lower rates of the loans and the longer durations and the other windows as well, as I mentioned earlier, for sustainability and the other factors. I will just, the last point I will discuss will be on the challenges. The few points, just a quick overview. The reasons for the challenges we are facing are lack of understanding of procedures to get a credit, non-availability of the required documents, especially third-party audit reports, very slow responses of NDA in holding GCF board meetings for giving NOL, very slow evaluation process by GCF. It takes 6 months or more. It should be reduced to 30 days, ideally. Mostly looking for grants, which is relatively small. If we have to, fund larger portfolio and the demand is more, so we have to look forward towards the estimation as well for the need. In many cases, we have to chip in sizable equity, which most organizations don't have. So these are some of the challenges and the solutions which at the organization, individual and government level, we need to foresee, discuss, and come up with the solutions to accelerate the entire process and to build a resilient Pakistan together. Thank you.
Thank you, Lishba, for sharing with us what you at UNDP are thinking about the flood recovery and how we can link these kind of opportunities with being resilient. Thank you so much. Anam, now I would move to you, because if I take GIZ as an anchor between us, between government and other entities, how would you suggest that there should be a strong coordination mechanism?
I think one of the Assalamu alaikum. First thing I would like to say is GIZ mostly works with the government. So, anchoring the capacity of the, the development sector or different NGOs is important, but there are some organizational things that, where we are limited. So our first priority is the government sector, and GIZ mostly does, it gives technical support. Capacity building is its main component, but there's sometimes we are limited that, we can only do that with government sector. And as far like my experience, what I've seen is, if you talk about specifically, we talk about climate finance, it is something, if you go to any province, you go to P&D departments, you go to any department in provinces, this is something that they really want. You go there and all they talk about is GCF. And there, I would like to say what Alishba said, I would like to add to that, that there are other funding windows, there are other finance facilities, but I think the first thing is they don't know about them. GCF is just the buzzword right now, and everyone is like, we want to access GCF. they can go for Jeff first, they can go for adaptation fund, which is not as laborious, the process, the whole, like, how long it takes to get it. So I think what I would say, GIZ is working on capacity development. Like we're working with provincial departments we're supporting the PNDs in their accreditation, as it was mentioned before, that there are not enough accredited entities. And there are international development agencies who are accredited, but the issue with them is everyone has a priority area, or they have, their own specific, projects or specific areas where they want to work on. And sometimes that does not match with something that the government wants to do, or what they see is needed on the ground. Just like if we can say GIZ is an accredited entity from GCF, if they want to work on a project, they're in over 50 countries all over the world. They have to see this is our priority area. And if Pakistan, if they want to work with PND, but that is not the priority area of PND Punjab, because everything comes from GIZ's headquarters, they won't be okay with being the accredited entity. So I think for me, from my experience, I've seen it's really important that we have more national accredited entities when we talk about GCF funding, because then again, it comes about the priority areas and who wants to, which agency's priority is what. Apart from that, what we're doing is we are working we just recently had a training on developing GCF proposals with the government counterparts. And it is something that came from them because they really wanted to learn that, because, all they want to make GCF proposals, but the issue again comes, we know how detailed the GCF proposal is. In Pakistan, as we talked about, there's the information is there sometimes, but it's still in the form of files. The information is still in PDF formats. We need to go digital, or we need, it's really difficult getting that hard copy information into a GCF project proposal. And then apart from that, most of the projects are in PC1 formats. So they think that a PC1 can be made into a GCF proposal, which is impossible. So there are, like, I think from what I've seen or what I've experienced, like if in just 1 year, what I've seen from just, if I talk about PND Punjab, a year ago, knowing and seeing the change, like they are working on their capacities as well. Like I know people who work in PND Punjab who are doing these online courses themselves. They did the self-assessment for GCF accreditation. They are learning. So I'm saying what I've seen, and I'm a little hopeful that if you go to the PND departments, I've specifically worked with KP and Punjab, they really want to bring GCF funding in their province. They are going out of their way to learn. I mean, they're writing to us that this is what we want to learn. How can you support us? So there is a need, because, they work on ground, they understand the issues. But then the issue is the processes are so long. If I just talk about Punjab, PND, their accreditation application, like it's been 4 or 5 months, some error happened, and it's still like they're writing to GCF, they're doing everything. So I feel like apart from not having the knowledge, but these bureaucratic processes of these funds who are there to support countries like Pakistan, they're also, I mean, it seems like they don't want countries to get funds because the processes are so difficult. So to me, it feels like Pakistan is a lose-lose situation. At one side, we don't have the capacity, but at the other side, these funds make the processes even more difficult. I just wanted to share a few points. I think this is end of last year, we had different departments, agriculture, irrigation, PND, in KP and Punjab. So we had a discussion with them, and we wanted to know like what their needs are, what are their challenges, so we can design the trainings and the capacity development program according to that. And some of the things they said, like, it is how the setup is. They're saying what happens in the government departments is, even if a person, you do their capacity building, they're there, they get transferred. Like you don't know, you invest in a person that, this is what they'll do, but they're transferred in a few months. Then there is, there is the political leadership. They also prioritize different activities. So that is something that is also creating issues. They're like, they're saying their climate change cells are not there at P&D departments. They need data, they need updated systems to work on climate change projects. So that is something that is missing. They're saying there is the processing times are really long. There is the lack of communication between federal and provincial departments, I think, and that is something that is one of the biggest issue, because we had a workshop where we had people from MOCC and we had people from PND, KP, and Punjab, and they were just asking all these normal questions that you can just talk on the phone with. And both of the provincial departments said that we've had these issues for months and years, and just one communication and one having a one sitting where you're just talking with someone from MOCC, you just understand these processes are not that difficult. So I think that there's this lack of communication, there's this lack of structure that is not there. As I said, the high turnover of government officials. Then there is also the lack of awareness of the understanding of the funding windows. Because if you're at MOCC, if you're at Climate Finance Unit, there when the JEF window starts, when the JEF star allocation is happening, what is happening. But that information, the provincial departments don't have them, and the projects come from them. So I think this, apart from all the other issues we talked about, the lack of communication and this a structured system and how our government institutions work, that's also creating a lot of issues in just accessing these finances.
Anam, actually, these are the practical things which you mentioned, because I have the chance to edit and review more than 25 reports, which UNDP actually does with the SDG unit and other PNDs and government department in all the 4 provinces. And similar kind of thing I pointed out in that. But there are some good things, as you also mentioned, that there is an urge to learn. For example, I would quote here the 2 of the recent reports which has UNDP has just launched. I have had reviewed and edited them. One is the SDG investor map. That's an important document which gives us a very good clue of from where we can generate money for development finance, for climate finance, both. So there are projects mentioned, what value we needed, which sort of investment needed, which is the outcome of each of the project. These are along all the sectors it is mentioned. So this is an important document to look at if we really want to have finance from our own resources, if not the DCF and other global resources. The second one is again from Punjab investment strategy. So they also have a full investment strategy where they have a full chapter on climate finance, how to access this from within the resources, from private sector, from other sources, and international also. And of course, you rightly mentioned that there is a lack of expertise on accessing to the fund, to even to the information to the funds. So basic thing is that, and then fulfilling our requirements, that is a tough job. That's why the expertise, and you mentioned about the rollout. When somebody is trained, they are transferred to somewhere else. So these are also institutional gap. Anyway, that is a part of another, we have another paper on that. So Avas will be presenting next week on that. Thank you very much for your intervention and all the participants. Now we have some time for question and answer. So panelists are here. If you have a question, just raise your hand, ask a question, and mention the respondent you want. Okay, Jabir.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Ali Jabir, journalist from EPP. I had a general question to the panelists that, as you mentioned, that at sometimes we had the capacity, but over the years we lost that capacity due to different reasons. But when we see an experiment like Pakistan creates National Disaster Risk Management Fund, one of its own kind, it starts a process of accrediting local NGOs, and then it has an elaborate process that is really, difficult and tricky for those NGOs that are not habitual of doing such kind of paperwork. Then it provides them an opportunity to, build up their capacities. If in these kinds of scenarios, you have also mentioned that GCF is not the only window, then what is the problem? Where is the issue that hampers us to approach other funds and other organizations? And when we approach those funds, do you think our bureaucracy is ready to learn those different and difficult things that is different from the status quo? What they follow is the paper, the files, and all that document. As Anna mentioned, that their document, their PC1 mindset is not changing. So in this scenario, how can what is the light at the tunnel to approach those finances, the other funds, the 28 funds that are still tappable for Pakistan to get the climate finance? Thank you.
Matt, yeah, I'll answer you. Thank you, Ji, for the question. You mentioned NDRMF. Yes, that was conceived post 2010 floods. Ji. Started discussions around 2012. So that's again 10 years back. And we were operational in 2018 practically. It's been 5 years. We've completed first batch of our projects. We've had projects about a little over 300 million US for that matter. We've supported the government in COVID. We've supported the government post 2022 floods. We've built up schools, retrofitting of buildings, flood protection works, even planted mangroves. So I would take the honors of saying that the NDRMF has been trying to play its part, starting from all the way from the coast to the point where the glove starts actually. So that's like there. We have built capacities, or we've tried to build capacities of our partners. You mentioned NGOs, so we take them. Sorry. We earlier had better pipeline because accessing climate finance is a continuous task. So when you come up with NDCs, you've given an adaptation cost on a per year basis and a mitigation cost on a target based approach on how much will we be reducing by say 2030 for that matter. So when we say the adaptation cost, it is yearly. That brings me to my point that the pipeline has to be continuous. For that, the capacities have to be built. We have to apply on a yearly basis, and then whatever we receive has to be spent in time. So all of this is in cycle. You mentioned bureaucratic culture or whatever we may refer to. Honestly, from my humble experience, all these big institutions are bureaucratic, or they try to be transparent in a manner. It is how we want to look at things. We got one entity accredited in less than 2 years, and we failed to get accreditation in 5 years. It was the same system. We've had delayed in our projects at NDRMF, and we are the same institution which was able to give 50 million US dollars in 24 hours to the government to get the first procurement done for COVID from Beijing. We're the same institution. So you see, I think in totality, there's nothing where we say it's absolutely wrong, and there's nothing which we say is absolutely correct. So we're somewhere in between. The options of improving is immensely there. And accessing GCF, or I mean, she rightly mentioned, our colleague from JZ, that it's a buzzword right now, but we haven't really exhausted that as well. And we're not even moving to other funds as well. So both have to be done in parallel. If I say that we first exhaust GCF, okay, we start doing that, we exhaust that in 5 years, and then we start moving to other funds, we will be silent for another couple of years. So that's not really a good approach for that matter. So all of these have to be dealt in parallel. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between climate finance and development finance. So there's no one size which fits everything. I mean, for mitigation, we might be accessing one entity. Within mitigation, energy and transport might be attracting different donors for that matter. So we got to see where is our need. I mean, in a layman's language, honestly, responding to the question on documentation, when you go fishing, you put the food which the fish likes, not you. So if we are going to access grants, if we are going to ask money, we got to come up with documents which the lender has, which the donor wants, the compliance which the IFIs want, because we are the ones asking for money. So they got to do their own compliance. And in APG alone, with 36 countries, how do we compete that? We got 188 parties to the UNFCCC. I mean, if they are being transparent, if they are neutral, they would consider all 188 equally. So we got to come up with the fact that where can we have domestic advantages while having economic and eco-based benefits for the globe as well. So that's also important. Thank you so much.
Just if I may add to this, see, अब PC1 की बात कर रहे थे, so because I worked with the planning commission, so वहाँ पे copy paste बहुत ज़्यादा होता है. अगर आपका वो आ रहा हो, वही चीज़ आपका एक document चल रहा है, you're not relying on baseline data that is up to date. कितनी research हो रही है, वो जो हमारे plans और policies बनते हैं, वो to what extent are they based on scientific data, science-based evidence की बात होती है. If somebody is working on something on a scientific basis, is that knowledge being transferred to other entities? Is that information publicly available? Does the planning commission here in Islamabad have it? Do the local PNDDs have it? To what extent are they sharing it? When we talk about energy, and then we talk about food, water, energy nexus at a conference at a hotel, are the participants wary about the government's long-term plans and the nitty-gritty that entails? See, it is not. Unfortunately, what we need are fit-for-purpose plans and policies. We need fit-for-purpose projects. So we need projects that account for flooding in the Sirabad, or deforestation in Chitral, or water and sanitation issues in the Potohar. To what extent are these projects available if we go to the entities and ask for them? They're not. So our response to this is that perhaps we are acting more in a reactive mode. We will look for grants. So there's a call for proposals, and then we develop this. And the issue here is that we haven't, and this is perhaps, this speaks to a broader malaise in the country, and that is that we haven't really thought about these issues as our own, right? If it's a water and sanitation issue, if it's a safe drinking water issue, if it's a DIR issue, we are not concerned about how people will be affected by our projects. It's because there is no focus on environmental or social justice or climate justice. We like to talk about it at international conferences, but to what extent is that being inculcated in our plans and policies? And that's where the gaps are. इस वक्त तो यही है ना कि बाहर से कहीं से पैसा आएगा तो हम लोग ये चीज करेंगे. Why is it that we need to have a foreign government provide us with money for safe drinking water projects in Islamabad and Pindi, a project that we're working on, right? Well, why is it that these aren't on top of the list? And जब आप इस सवाल का जवाब दे देंगे तो फिर आपकी बाकी चीजें भी align कर जाएंगी. And very quickly, there's this whole discussion on just energy transition. JET partnership है, उसके अंदर पाकिस्तान का नाम नजर आता है किसी को? Why is that? We're talking about Nigeria and Senegal and Indonesia आ चुका है उसके अंदर. But why is it कि पाकिस्तान just energy transition में अपना नाम नहीं डाल सका? वो क्यों नहीं वो proposal आया? It's because our focus has been on coal, fossil fuel, coal power plants under China-Pakistan economic corridor. हमने proposals ही नहीं बनाए that speak to a just energy transition. जिस तरह के $10 billion आज से 2 साल पहले South Africa के पास गए. Similarly, large amount of funding is coming to Indonesia. हाँ, there are lacunas there. वहाँ पे भी issues आ रहे हैं, but at least वो वहाँ से वो funding को access करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. हम तो उस तरफ वो माइल ही नहीं हो रहे. And that is primarily because वो coordination के issues हैं, communication के issues हैं, data sharing के issues हैं. हमारी अपनी understanding when it comes to climate risk वो बहुत ज़्यादा shoddy है. So even अगर आपके जो funds आना शुरू होंगे तो we have to be very careful क्योंकि climate maladaptation is a reality. And अगर हम maladaptation की तरफ चले जाए even with funds that have been given to us, then that will be totally catastrophic as well.
There is a question from our colleague from online, Asad Mahmood Saab, and this is for you, Anam. Can GIZ representative tell where one can access the budget expense detail of all the mitigation and adaptation project of GIZ being implemented in Pakistan? Okay, Ji, are you hearing? You can go to the GIZ website.
You can just go to the GIZ website and it'll show you all the countries in the world where it's working. So you just have to select Pakistan, and then there are different sectors that it works at. So you have to select energy and climate change. So it'll tell all the projects that are working. I don't think budget details are there because that's not something that is public, but it'll tell you this, what the project is doing. If you want any information, it'll have the contact details of the person who's leading the project manager, and also like how much the whole project is.
Organized companies have invested some money in coffee, in coal, and these kind of sectors. And they are claiming internationally that they are contributing to climate resilience. So what does the UNFCCC and other are doing? This is their comment, not question to all. So I shared from online as well. So revert back to here. Ji, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Sajid Hussain Malik. I worked as a senior researcher in Ministry of Law, Supreme Court, and also as a registrar of companies, Security and Exchange Commission. I will say something in Urdu because जब सुप्रीम कोर्ट में उर्दू का केस चल रहा था उसमें मेरी बड़ी कंट्रीब्यूशन थी क्योंकि मैं अटॉर्नी जनरल के साथ था, तो थोड़ी सी मोहब्बत करता हूँ इस टॉपिक पे। इतने ज्यादा सेमिनार मतलब मेरी जिंदगी में तो बहुत ज्यादा हुए, तो मैं नहीं समझता कि सेमिनार से कोई फायदा हो सकता है 50% या कुछ हो सकता है। अब जब भी कोई क्लाइमेट चेंज या कोई हादसा या कुछ चीजें होती हैं, हम फार्मर की तरफ देखते हैं और वो जो फार्मर पैसा भिजवाते हैं, मैं चाहता हूं कि वो जो पैसा लगा है उसके पे रिसर्च करें कि ये पैसा लगा है, इसका ये फायदा हुआ है और हमने ये काम किए। ये नजर नहीं आता, ये आता है कि पैसा आया, ये आया फलाना। दूसरा, हमें प्रिकॉशन मेजर करनी चाहिए। आजकल मैं कोई 15 दिन हो गए, हर अखबार में लिखा हुआ है 2 टन मुंशियात पकड़ी गई। इतनी ज्यादा, मैं कहता हूँ पूरी दुनिया में शायद इतनी ना हो। फिर जब वो उसे जलाते हैं मुझे इतना अफसोस होता है। ये नहीं कह रहा कि वो हमें दे दें, लेकिन कम अज कम इस तरह आग जलाने से ये सारी फजा खराब करना, ये इस तरह की सारी, तो प्रिकॉशन मेजर भी तो हम कर सकते हैं, कम अज कम उसको गुजारा कर सकते हैं। बाकी तो कुदरती मदद करती है। फिर इतना टाइम इंडिया पानी फेंक रहा है, हमारा अपना सैलाब है, इतने अरसा पाकिस्तान बना, क्यों ना हम छोटे छोटे डैम नहीं बना सके उस पर। तो मैं क्योंकि खुद रजिस्ट्रार ऑफ कंपनीज रहा हूँ, फॉरेन एनजीओज वगैरह ये सारा जानता हूँ, वहां से जिस तरह फंडिंग लेते हैं फिर उसका यूटिलाइज ही 25% होता है। इस पे मैं कहता हूँ कि कुछ ऐसा काम करें कि आम अवेयरनेस दें आवाम को और आवाम भी इसमें शामिल हो, कूड़ा किरकट या इस तरह की चीजें ना करें, जो जो हम आसानी से कर सकते हैं। मैं शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ मुझे सवाल करने का मौका दिया।
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll just revert back to. Okay, I have a general question. Any of the panelists can answer that. And it is that in light of the recent global climate agreements, how can Pakistan position itself to access a larger share of international climate finance resources? That's one question. Second question, if I can come, if you don't mind. Yeah, sure. Could you discuss the potential for public-private partnerships in financing and implementing climate resilient projects? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ji. This came up during our initial discussions as well. The only way we can get a larger pie of the cake is by being prepared. As I mentioned that when we talk about NDC's targets and the money identified across with it, did we really come up with those number of projects? The answer is no, actually. So if you don't ask for more than $20 million, you won't get more than $20 million. So if you're asking for a bigger pie, you got to come up with more projects which are bankable, which complete their safeguard requirements, which bring in domestic and international benefits, and then you access whichever fund, whichever entity you wish to, and then we get the access. And at times there are rejections as well. The projects are not up to date in terms of competition. There are other countries bringing more benefits in the same thematic area. So my only submission would be to come up with more projects, to ask for more money, to be prepared for more money, and then to implement that. That's the only way we can access that particular one. Thank you.
I'll just like to add that, when we talk about bankable projects, it's really difficult to have adaptation project as a bankable project, because a lot of the times it's mitigation projects which are bankable projects. So when we talk about public-private partnership, it's mostly mitigation projects. So, so I'll just say that right now, it is important that Pakistan has more mitigation projects, but our priority is adaptation projects. And because we are, very vulnerable to climate change, and we have to adapt to survive, to save lives and livelihoods. So one of the reasons that private sector is not that involved, they should be, they are to some extent, is because the government itself is prioritizing adaptation, and also a lot of international development agencies, because a few years back mitigation was their priority, but right now, seeing how impacted Pakistan is to climate change, it's the adaptation which is becoming a focus. So adaptation projects are mostly not bankable projects.
Any other question from audience? Yeah, yes. please.
I get just following up on this, and then I don't know. Okay, Wad is also here. So फिर अब how do we make them bankable? What जो bankable वाली definition है वो change होनी पड़ेगी. किस तरीके से हम projects को adaptation के projects को उस level पर लेके आए जहाँ पर एक solar power plant लग रहा है. तो that is उसके बड़े tangible benefits आ रहे हैं, accrue हो रहे हैं. So what can we do to ensure कि adaptation के projects भी उसी तरह देखे जाए?
I mean, if you look at GCF, sometimes there are specific adaptation mitigation projects, but there are projects that have both. But if I'm just going to take an example of GLOF2 project, there's nothing bankable in it, because what it's making flood protection walls, it's making check dams, it's making gabion walls. So right now we know that GLOFs are going to come, and it might destroy a whole valley. So what are we going to do? We're just going to make walls to contain the flood water, just to stop the destruction. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but just thinking, how can a project like that be bankable when our priority right now is to save lives and livelihoods?
I'm not going into trying to answer that question. I mean, I'll just give a fruit for thought maybe. जब हम अडेप्टेशन की बात कर रहे हैं तो हम लाइवलीहुड सेविंग की बात कर रहे हैं. इस वक्त जो ग्लोबल सिचुएशन चल रही है, चाहे वो यूक्रेन की है या डिजास्टर्स की है या किसी और चीज की हम बात कर रहे हैं, तो it depends what you pick up anything. You pick up हवाई जी, हवाई में कितने लोग मर गए? मोरक्को का अर्थक्वेक ले लें आप, टर्की का अर्थक्वेक ले लें जी, आप लिबिया की फ्लडिंग ले लें जी, और हमारा मुल्क तो है ही है सामने. जो कॉस्ट ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटेरियन रिकवरी आएगी वो बचती है जब अडेप्टेशन मेजर्स अप्रोप्रिएटली ले गए. तो व्हेन यू कनेक्ट द ओवरऑल साइकिल आपका अडेप्टेशन का प्रोजेक्ट बैंकेबल बन जाए, क्योंकि अगर आप अडेप्टेशन मैयर्स नहीं लेंगे तो द कॉस्ट ऑफ रिकवरी रिहेबिलिटेशन इज मेनी फोल्ड्स. So the bankability is there in everything you do. Even if you're having a debate on that particular thing, usme bhi, to my humble opinion, it's present there. Thank you.
मैं इसको strengthen इसलिए करूंगा क्योंकि back in my role when I was in Oxfam Asia office in Bangkok, so I initiated and I commissioned a paper first time years back, जब खास तौर पे 2013 का हयान साइक्लोन के बाद की मैं बात कर रहा हूँ. We commissioned that paper on this particular aspect, whether there is a convergence between climate change adaptation and DRR. So if we have DRR and CCA together, and these you just mentioned cost of saving life of the people, then only we can really make it bankable. और हमें कहीं ना कहीं ये इसको ना ब्रिज करना पड़ेगा. DRR को हम अलग स्ट्रीम में नहीं ले जा सकते और CCA को अलग नहीं. इनको ब्रिज करने से ही मेरा ख्याल है इसको हम बैंकेबल कर सकते हैं. आई एम वर्किंग ऑन इट मोर पाकिस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में. ये मैंने फिलीपीन के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में किया था. बट हियर इज आल्सो अ नीड. थैंक यू वेरी मच. आई स्ट्रेंथन. जी.
You have very rightly mentioned that we should work on climate smart disaster risk management. And secondly, I would, suggest and what the practical scenarios are. Disaster risk financing strategy. If you talk about DRF strategy, if we look forward towards community pulled model, then we would be, better in a position to develop bankable projects for adaptation as well, because that will be demand of the community. And as mentioned earlier by Fawad, that who wants to invest in the risk? For that, whether it's disaster risk financing, whether it's climate adaptation, or any other related strategy or policy or funding decision, anything related. When you work for what is the demand of the market, what is the demand of the community, then only you will be able to come up with economically benefit projects which are bankable as well, and which are accepted by banks as well. These projects, when you will, as Anna mentioned, when you will develop the projects which are economically viable and financially sustainable, then you will be able to, defend it on all grounds and at all forums. The banks will be interested to fund for that. The community want to take the risk, accept the risk, and want to take it further. So we need to, I would again say, we need to change the mindset and our approach at all levels, whether individual level, whether institutional level, or whether it's government or non-government, any level. We need to change our mindsets and to build resilient Pakistan, as the theme of today's seminar is assessing finance, climate finance for a resilient Pakistan. Resilient Pakistan can only be built with a teamwork, where you engage all. And when you talk about PPP model, that is implemented these days in Pakistan, especially if you see the organizations which have actively worked in Pakistan in light of aftermath of flood 2022, whether you consider UNDP, or another example I can give is of Sindh People's Housing for Flood Affectees, which is coming all over the Sindh. These are live examples, and these are examples of the projects which are successful and appreciated by all. And that is, if you go deep into it, these are completely based on community pulled model. What is the need of the community? For example, if UNDP, has developed any project or is taking further any project or implemented it, it has seen what the community needs. And even we have considered the gender as well. For example, what is the need? They need, what is the uttermost need? They need hygiene kits, they need tool kits, or whatever on the immediate basis. Then we are looking forward to all these projects which are bankable and accepted by all on Nexus approach. Nexus approach, it talks about the short-term benefits and the long-term benefits, like what we need to do immediately as of now, and what we need to do in the future for the community, for their livelihoods, and other matters, because these are humanitarian projects and development projects. So we have to, we have to be emotional as well, and we have to keep the needs of the people, the community, for those for whom we are doing it, in light, and incorporated and embedded into the project as well. And whether it's the funding decision, strategy decision, or the project implementation. So I would recommend that if we change the approach, we can come up with better solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I think we should, yeah. Yeah, please, on your mic.
It's on it. It's in regards to climate taxes. So question is, how can Pakistan effectively implement climate taxes and to support climate resilient efforts and reduce emissions? So that could be one of the ways to, look into to generate some results, I guess.
Tax. Carbon taxation.
Carbon pricing, that is, immature currently. If you talk about the practical level, it's an ongoing process. But that's a very good idea, which is getting very much focused in Pakistan. If we are able to, if we are able to calculate, embed carbon taxation, and be accountable as well for that. For that, we need financial reporting standards and other strategies. Then it will come up with very good, benefits. Some of them are also linked with some national and global strategies. And if I give you example, how can we have, carbon incorporated into it? For example, if you work for reconstruction of houses, the bricks we use, they can, be linked with the carbon taxation and the carbon emission. Okay, and like this, this is how we could embed carbon taxation into the flood recovery program. Thank you.
I think this is an interest. China's example. Even for their electric power companies, they have put a carbon kind of a tax in the form of that, because they will be, net zero in 2060. Before that, they have given some sort of quota to their power companies that under certain limit you can emit the carbon, and over and above that, then you have to pay. So that kind of a mechanism China already has in place. Maybe for Pakistan, because we are already going on coal and other things. So that could be a challenge. Thank you very much. We had a very good discussion today. Thank you, Khabar, for your paper. And it has generated debate. And of course, you have some of the good points to improve your paper. So you can note down. Thank you, Annam. Thank you, Fawad Bhai. Thank you, Ratsab and Aleshpa. So next seminar in series is on day after, on 21st. It is on the institutional mechanism on climate resilient Pakistan. Thank you very much for your presence. I think, okay, thank you.